Good afternoon, everybody. We're here with Principles of International Business. We're going to be covering chapters 9 through 12 today. Once again, I selected one term from each chapter to take a deeper dive on than what we could get done in class. So we'll go ahead and get started with chapter 9. Chapter 9, we're going to talk about letter of credit. So letter of credit can be found here on page 307. Takes up most of the page to include figure 9.5. This chart at the top here really shows how a letter of credit works and gives a good, graphical representation of how that works. So we'll talk about that in a second here. But the key concept here for letter of credit is a financial contract that states that the importer's bank will pay a specific sum of money to the exporter upon delivery of the merchandise. So letter of credit's used when the importer and exporter haven't worked together a lot. They're not really familiar with how business is done with each other. So they want to go through trusted sources. The importer trusts their bank, the exporter trusts their bank. So that's who they go through with this letter of credit. So if we take a look at the chart here that I've recreated, let me get my camera out of the way. You have at the top here, the blue lines actually represent the letter of credit. And then the red lines are gonna represent your shipping documents, and the green is the merchandise. So as you can see by the blue lines here, the U.S. exporter, who has maybe never done business with the Chinese importer before, doesn't necessarily trust them, just unfamiliar with them, decides he wants to go through his trusted bank, Bank of America, and then the importer will go through their trusted bank, Bank of China. So between these two banks who have done business together many, many times, probably a lot of these types of transaction, they issue a letter of credit. So the U.S. exporter is guaranteed a specific sum of money upon receiving the merchandise by the Chinese importer. So once this letter of credit is established, the U.S. exporter goes through his freight forwarder and the shipping company to ship the merchandise over to China, who on their end has a receiving shipping company, has to go through customs broker, obviously, because it is an international, and then to the importer. So this chart here at the top of 307 really lays out how this letter of credit works and how everything goes with the shipping documents, like I said, in red, the letter of credit in blue, and then the merchandise at the bottom there in green. So basically what a letter of credit is a bank facilitated transaction. The importer is going through his trusted bank, his or her, the exporter is going through their trusted bank. And these banks, like I said, have done, countless numbers of these transactions, so they trust each other. That way the uncertainty between the importer and exporter is kind of relaxed because they're going through their trusted banks. It reduces the transaction cost by simply lowering the transaction risks. It's pretty simple. So now moving on to chapter 10. Chapter 10, we're going to talk about location-specific advantage. Now this is going to be found here on page 322. Right here takes up most of the bottom. So location-specific advantage is pretty simple. It is just the benefits a firm reaps from the features specific to a place. Now these features aren't necessarily just geographic in nature. They can be obviously geographic, but they can also be the agglomeration, which is the agglomeration is the clustering of economic activities in certain locations, usually, like I said, referred to as agglomeration. Now, this agglomeration stems from knowledge spillover, industry demand for skilled labor force, and industry demands for specialized suppliers. So basically, because all these industries are in the same, all these companies of the same industry, are in the same location, you get people moving from company to company. The labor force is there in place because all of these same companies within this industry are there. And then suppliers obviously are going to spring up where, they're needed. So because there's such a great concentration of the specific industry in the specific location, that's where the suppliers are going to locate themselves. So some examples of this agglomeration is shown in the book here, Dallas, all the telecom companies that are located in and around the Dallas area. Now they're all located there because there were ones that were located there. They developed this skilled base of workers, suppliers, and that. And because this base of workers and suppliers was there, more have moved in, and now it's just a hub for the telecom industry. Going back to the beginning, the geographic location-specific advantage, we can talk about the Weyerhaeuser company. Now, they're a lumber company that's based in Washington. Between the state of Washington and Canada, they control about 14 million acres of land where they farm trees. Basically, they grow trees for lumber. So because that's a great environment to grow trees that are the white pines and the different yellow pines and that grow in that region, because they grow so hardily in that region, obviously it's a geographic advantage to be located there rather than, say, Tucson, Arizona, where you're not going to be able to grow the number of trees that they can grow there and the quality and types of trees. So then moving on to chapter 11. In chapter 11, we're going to talk about the blue ocean strategy. Now, the blue ocean strategy found here, chapter 11, page 356 at the bottom, and moving over to 357 at the top. Basically, the key concept is it's a strategy that focuses on developing new markets, the blue ocean, and avoids attacking core markets defended by rivals, which is likely to result in a bloody price war, a red ocean. Now, to understand this blue ocean strategy, you really need to understand a couple of other terms that go along with it, both attack and counterattack. Now, attack is an initial set of actions to gain a competitive advantage, and these set of actions are against companies and corporations that, attacking them within their core market. And obviously, if someone is attacked within their core market, they're going to retaliate, and these retaliatory actions are the counterattack. Now, these back and forth attack, counterattack is what leads to it, as we see here on the screen here, a bloody price war, a red ocean. So rather than going into a market that may be saturated or a market that a certain company has a stronghold in, the blue ocean means you're looking for new markets and you're developing new markets to go into rather than challenging them on their quote unquote home turf. So there's quite a few examples of this. The one used in the book is the Azul Airlines, who are a Brazilian airline, who rather than focus on the already saturated and well-established Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro route, which is the busiest travel route in the world, rather than focus on that, where there's already a lot of airlines that are very well established in that, they decided to focus more on some rural routes. So basically focusing on smaller towns and cities to get people to these two major hubs instead of in between the two hubs themselves. And because they were able to focus on this new market, they were able to thrive in a previously underserved area of transportation in Brazil. Another example would be iTunes. Back, when I was younger, and I'm sure most of you don't remember this, you went, if you wanted music, you went to the mall and you bought a CD at the CD store, the music store. And before that, it was 8-tracks, cassettes, albums, things like that. You go to a store and purchase them there. So every record company was putting out albums, putting out records, putting out CDs to be sold in these stores. So the market was just saturated, and big names. You got Sony, BMG, Atlantic, things like that were just juggernauts and massive. And there's no way somebody knew. They were very high barriers to entry. So iTunes, rather than challenging these established companies in this area, because they took advantage of the advent of technology and that, and kind of piggybacking on some maybe less than reputable things that have been happening through Napster and LimeWire and that, basically made a legal version of being able to get music online. And the advantage, there's lots of advantages. You can get individual songs rather than buying a whole album. You can make playlists and pick and choose and things like that, which previously you couldn't do before. So they really took advantage of that new market, that blue ocean strategy, rather than trying to enter something with very high barriers to entry. And the last example here is the Ford Model T. Back when Henry Ford developed the Model T, there were hundreds of automakers across the country that were building, small batch vehicles, all handmade, specific to orders for the people that were ordering the vehicles. And rather than trying to start a company that would compete with these type of auto manufacturers, Henry Ford developed, as we've all been taught here, especially here in Michigan, Henry Ford developed the assembly line, the mass-produced vehicle that was scaled back as far as amenities and things like that. It was a very bare bones vehicle, but it also served the market of people that couldn't afford these high-end luxury handmade automobiles. So Henry Ford entered that market of the underserved market of people with maybe a little bit less money in that. And because of that, the Ford Model T was able to thrive and dominated the market for years before any competition came along. And finally, moving into chapter 12, we're going to talk about acquisition. Now, acquisition here on page 375, right here on the chart. So acquisition is a transfer of the control of operations and management from one firm, the target, to another, the acquirer, the former becoming a unit of the latter. So much like Blue Ocean strategy, in order to kind of understand acquisition, there's another term that you need to understand, which is merger. Now, a merger is the combination of operations and management of two firms to establish a new legal entity. So these two, the example used in the book here is Fiat and Chrysler. Fiat and Chrysler entered into a merger. They merged, became one new company, both on equal footing within this new entity. In kind of contrast to that is the acquisition, where one company buys another company, and that company can either be completely dissolved in, and their old, name and trade, not necessarily trademarks will come with it, but their old name and way of doing things are maybe completely abandoned, and it just falls under the new larger company. Or they can be kept, the name, their operations, things like that, kept intact and still operating the way they were, but just with the new company owning them, so they become a unit of that company. So there's some examples of this. Amazon and Whole Foods is a big example. Amazon purchased Whole Foods. They acquired them. They did not merge, so Amazon owns Whole Foods and still operates them as they were before. They're still known as Whole Foods. They're not Amazon grocery store, anything like that. Whereas if they merged, they could have become, say, Amazon Foods or something like that. Who knows what they could have called it, but it wasn't a merger, it was an acquisition. The same with Microsoft and Disney, who acquired LinkedIn and 21st Century Fox respectively. Now, both of those, LinkedIn and 21st Century Fox, have kept their name, their branding, things like that, but are working under these parent companies. So that is it for chapters 9 through 12, one term from each. Once again, like I said in my last video, if anybody has any questions about these terms or any of the other terms or anything within these chapters prior to the exam, please reach out to me. I have no problem helping anybody out. I've said before, I don't have all the answers, but I'll sure as heck help you find what you need to find. So once again, just let me know if anybody needs anything.